My name is Captain Kyle. I am captain of the Nina, Columbus's favorite ship. It was the smallest of the three, but it was the one he favored over all the others. It was one of the fastest of the fleet, and he chose this as his flagship on his second and third voyages back to the New World. Up forward we have the windlass, the mechanical advantage that they use to do all of the heavy lifting on the ship, to raise the anchor and that sort of thing. It's very simple to operate. Can use up to 4 sailors on board.
Nope, they're square so you can stack them.
Simple way of using it, simply grab the handle and rotate. It has a dog on the port side there to keep it from going backwards. It only goes in one direction. Wind the line around the drum over here on the starboard side. As long as you have somebody keeping a little pressure on the line, you can put an enormous amount of pressure on things. We use it to raise the anchor nowadays, or to do the heavy lifting and raising the yards and that sort of thing. So it is a useful tool for us as well. The bow is the front part of the ship, of course. I have seen water come over the front of the bow before.
So you've actually seen, you've taken blue water over the bow?
I have taken blue water over the bow. It's pretty crowded, pretty busy then when that happens, but it's probably about a 13, 14 foot sea before you start to see water coming over the bow. To see blue water coming over the bow is pushing 20 feet. To actually see blue water coming over the bow, because the bow will like to ride up over the wave instead of going through it. But when it goes through it, it's a pretty high wave to come over the top of the ship. When it does, it rushes down through the decks like this. The cabin house, the cargo hatch, if you will, is raised up off the decks to allow that seawater to run off either side of the ship, down through what we call the scuppers here underneath the gunnels there. You can see a little daylight coming into the bottom of the ship. There's about an inch gap there between the bottom, and that lets the water run out very quickly. Down in the cargo hatch, where the sailors today live, we live down below decks. It's only about 5 foot 4 inches tall at its highest point down below decks. It gets smaller the further fore and aft you go. But this is where they carried all of the cargo in Columbus's time. That's where they had to carry all their live animals, all their food stores, spare parts, line, everything they needed for their journeys. As a result, there were no accommodations for the crew down below decks at all. All the crew members on the ship had to live, eat, and sleep up here on the main deck, completely exposed to the weather and elements. Very uncomfortable for sailors 500 years ago. People often ask, what would they do if it rained? And I said, you get a shower. It's a very fortunate thing when you're out at sea with salt water all about you, to get a little freshwater shower and get the salt out of your clothes and off your skin.
Were they able to collect this rainwater?
You would have had to collect the rainwater. Fresh water is the most precious commodity when you're out to sea. You would have done everything you could to collect all the rainwater. Once the sails start to collect the rainwater and things, and it washes off and gets the salt off the sails, you can taste it. And once it becomes clear enough and pure enough, they would have poured it, let it funnel right down into the barrels and resupply their water stores. Keeping water in a wooden barrel for any length of time is not usually a good thing. It turns pretty skunky in a hurry. One of the reasons they carried more wine than water on their trips. Would have been a more potent wine than we have today, more like a port. Pretty high proof stuff, but they would have mixed that with that bad water, watered it down, give it some sterilization, and maybe take the edge off the bad taste as well. The ship's boat here is indicative of the times. It was a very important thing to have with the ships. Would have had to been carried here on the deck at some point for the crossing. Maybe once in the islands and exploring, you could have towed this behind, but you could not afford to lose it. If you had a cable break or something like that, the thing could be lost out at sea. This was your primary means of transportation between the anchored ship and the shoreline. Would have also used this for most of the exploring around the islands once they were there. Once the ship had sailed into a harbor and dropped anchor, everybody climbed into this little boat, sail about, see what there was to see, explore for freshwater food and that sort of thing. Some of the ballast stones that we carry here in the ship, representative, we have 32 tons of granite rock in the bottom of the Nina that we use for ballast. These are ballast stones. They're packed all through the bottom of the ship, almost like a paved road down below decks. That's what keeps the ship upright so it doesn't roll over at the dock here when we're sailing. Provides its stability, that sort of thing. Djarum Pine Tar doesn't look like much. It's a very black jar, but if I open it up and take a whiff of this, doesn't do video justice, but it's very potent, and you can smell it here pretty quickly around wherever we are in the ship. It looks like blackstrap molasses or something like that, but it smells a bit like barbecue sauce. Some people love it, some people hate it. It's what they use primarily for preservatives on the lines and for the ship itself. It's one of the reasons the ships are black. They were waterproofed with pitch. Paint was very expensive in its day. Tar was cheap. So, lots of lines around, lots of blocks, and you'll notice these are all wooden blocks. There's nothing metal about them. They're all wood, including the axles and shivs inside. We keep it as authentic as possible, so everything is made out of wood. Come back here in the helm station. This is where we steer the ship. This portion of the ship is always occupied. Whenever we're not tied to a dock, somebody is here standing at the tiller, which is how we steer the ship. This enormous pole goes back and forth across this entire area back here, and it's what steers the ship when we're out at sea. There's always somebody standing here at the tiller whenever we're not tied up.
And this is where it sort of exits the ship.
This is where it goes out the stern of the ship. This is the tiller. The portion that goes down into the water is the rudder. It goes 6 feet underwater, and it's quite enormous. It can really beat you up in a heavy sea. You got to keep a firm grasp on this.
Speaking of the tiller going 6 feet below the water line, what is your draft?
7 feet. So it's a foot above the bottom of the ship. That's so that if we hit the bottom or bump the bottom somewhere, we don't actually rip the rudder off the back of the ship. That'd be a bad thing. So we spend a lot of time standing here. This is the compass that we use nowadays. It's a modern compass, of course, not like the one that Columbus would have used. He would have had a gimbal, magnetic card inside of a gimbaled box, and it would have spun wildly as the ship was rolling about the seas. But we have a more modern compass because safety is a little more important for us here on the decks. Down below this small hatch is the captain's quarters. This was the only quarters down below decks. 2 bunks in the corners for the captain and the first mate, who were on opposite watches, so they each essentially had the cabin to themselves. That's where they would have kept their journals and maps and things to keep out of the weather and out of the prying eyes of the crew members. One of the interesting things we have on board the ship is called the Quadrant. Nifty little piece of navigational equipment. This is the one that was favored by Columbus. The astrolabe was just starting to come into favor, but it involved a lot more math. This little thing is basically a protractor with a plumb bob on it. It's called a quadrant because it's 1/4 of a circle. And it's very simple to use. Simply sight up the edge of the quadrant to the North Star at night, let the plumb bob come down, and it gives you your degrees of latitude anywhere on the face of the planet. It'd be 0 degrees at the equator because the horizon would show the North Star right at the horizon. 90 degrees at the North Pole because you're looking directly overhead at the North Star, and anywhere in between is degrees of latitude. And in the days of sailing in Columbus's time, they would sail south to the latitude they were looking for, in Columbus's case 27 degrees north, and take a right and sail straight across the ocean to find 27th parallel on the other side.
Now, longitude was a little bit more of a problem.
Longitude was a considerable problem and was never really solved until the late 1700s. A man named Harrison, I believe, invented the first chronometer, and it was the first watch or clock that would keep time at sea. Clocks were not unheard of in Columbus's day, but they were like a grandfather clock, and they had a big swinging pendulum and kept the time. Well, pendulums don't work on a ship. When the ship is out here rolling like this at sea, the pendulum will eventually stop or go the other way, and that's a bad thing as well. So you cannot find longitude without time, and keeping an accurate piece of time was quite an argument, quite a process actually, not until the Brits discovered that in about the late 1700s was longitude able to be found. Interesting stuff.
And how many people were aboard the ship? I understand when it went back to
24 men when they left Spain, 27 returned. Columbus, his first mate, and 1 native returned back aboard the Nina to Spain. The Santa Maria ran aground in Hispaniola, which is now the Dominican Republic, in Haiti. She ran on a reef and was left behind intentionally by Columbus and his men. He left behind 39 members of the crew to use the ship's timbers to build the first settlement in the islands. He said, "I will return in 1 year," and he returned a year later, and there was no sign of any of the crew members, and very little had been built, and what had been built was burned to the ground.
And that's a mystery that's lost to
It's a mystery
history.
that's lost to history.
Captain, when can the public still see your ship?
We're here through Sunday. We're open 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. every day. $7 for adults, $5 for kids, $6 for senior citizens 60 and older.
Thank you very much, sir.
You're very welcome.